So you're CIO, but you actually once upon a time were CTO. You're still CTO?
That's right. No, I have a CTO.
Oh, you have a CTO?
Yeah, I'm CIO.
What happened?
Well, I got kicked upstairs. I found there's really only one good thing about being the CIO, is that nobody else could be the CIO. So, but I still run all technology for the New York Times, and so we unified technology a few years ago, which has allowed us to do a lot more interesting things than we could before when we were fragmented.
So May 26, 2008, there was this story that got published. I printed out an old blog post because you could do that still. That the New York Times was leaked, that the New York Times is going to have an API, a New York Times API coming. And this Marc Frons guy told Media Bistro, I don't know if they're still around, that internal developers of the paper will use the platform to organize structured data on the site. Following that, the paper plans to offer keys to the API, allowing programmers to more easily mash up the paper's structured content, reviews, event listings. How far we go, we don't know. How far did you go?
I would say we went very far. Now, I have to back up a minute because, so I joined the New York Times in 2006, and even though it was run at the time by one of the more visionary digital leaders, Martin Nisenholtz, the very success of the paper made it a very conservative place. Yeah. So when I got there, I had been working on the internet pretty much since the early days of Mozilla and always believed in the collaborative power of the web. But there was an editor, and he said, we had links on nytimes.com to, one link went to the Washington Post. He said, why are we doing that? Why are we linking out to other websites? I said, well, you have to understand the way the web works. And I thought we need a little shock treatment, and we launched this API. But the good news about that story is that this editor went on to be one of the best ambassadors for Twitter and really embraced Twitter, and now he's no longer at the Times. He's the editor of Mashable, Jim Roberts, and is one of the most progressive journalists I know in terms of social media. So in the space of less than a decade, the Times and the journalists who work at the Times went from this very kind of closed-in, protective idea about content and the way the internet worked to a much more open and embracing attitude. So it's really, in less than a decade going from dinosaurs to mammals. I mean, that doesn't happen in evolution. So it's pretty great transformation. Yeah,
we heard earlier from Jennifer Hanser about trying to do that in the music business, and they're still mucking around with it. How did you explain APIs to Martin and to Arthur?
Martin got it. Arthur, a little less so, but I think trusted. The Times, we needed to know, we knew we needed to innovate. We knew we needed to change. We knew even though we had a great website, it needed to be better. We knew mobile wasn't, 2006, it wasn't quite there yet, but we knew it was coming. Internet of Things was still very far out, but we knew that we needed to create a new type of culture at the time. So even though my background is in journalism, I started as a journalist, but I transitioned as I said, in the early days in the internet and built websites, and really always understood that journalism and technology were really intertwined. And if you really wanted to innovate, you had to create an engineering culture. I don't know what kind of companies you guys worked for, but in a lot of companies, technology is really a service organization, right? Your order takers, or that's sort of the wrap, and that's still the way it is in a lot of places. I believe that you had to act like a technology company. And to do that, you needed to empower engineers. And so APIs, ding, was this way to empower engineers and really unlock the power of our data and information. Because a vendor can't, we were early customers of Mashery because we knew we needed an outside company to manage a lot of the sort of the plumbing and the systems and help us with best practices. But who had to write those APIs? We did. Yeah. Right? It was all part of
There's got to be a back end.
That's right. That's right. So it became part of our culture, part of the way our systems worked, part of the services-based way systems talk to other systems, part of the way developers communicated with one another internally and with the outside world.
One of the things that I've tried to talk to people about over the last few years is sort of, APIs, when we started talking about them, they were a means of getting your stuff on other people's websites. And then mobile happened. Right. People said, I need a mobile app. And I think most of us here probably have a New York Times mobile app on our phone. But one of the things we've been trying to explain to people is you don't need a mobile app. There's actually a series of different apps based on who the audience is, what the context is, and what they're doing.
That's right.
And that the APIs are a basis for that. You've been playing with this some at the New York Times. There are more than one app.
That's right.
And you've experimented. I think I just read recently that you turned one off.
Yeah.
So how did you look at that, and what do you think of as an app strategy in that
So
sense?
our theory as an organization was we had to move at more internet speed. So it used to be, and it probably is still this way at a lot of companies, still kind of a waterfall methodology. Decided that doesn't work, moved to Agile. Now it's continuous delivery because, the cliche is fail fast. We would like to just do things fast. Maybe some of them will fail, and some of them won't. So we decided we're going to build a bunch of apps. We built an opinion app. We built an app called NYT Now, which is an app for a younger generation of readers. It's a more sort of designed mobile-first app to complement our main news app. We have a NYT cooking app, which is on the iPad, will probably be on the iPhone, which is an interesting case study I'll tell you about. So we decided we needed to launch a lot of things and see what happened. And the opinion app didn't really get the kind of audience we wanted to achieve, and we decided, okay, rather than continue to publish this thing, we're going to take those resources and that bandwidth and put it someplace else.
Yeah.
The cooking app, by the way, originally had a model where we were going to charge for it. And there are those of us who've been online for a while who said, we need to build an audience first.
Right.
And so it is now free. It already, in its first week or two, has over 1 million unique users. And the interesting thing about that is it is the beginning of a platform, because while it's recipes, not only can you look at 15,000 recipes from the New York Times, all this structured data that we had been leaving on the cutting room floor for years, which we finally built an API for, but you can also save recipes from other places on the internet, or you will be able to soon. So it's at the beginning of a platform, which was our dream about the New York Times itself. Here's this great repository of interactive news and information that we really want to connect with our users and turn into a news and information platform.
And so over time, how does the free app make money?
Right now it's advertising supported, and I think it might have a freemium model. The really good answer is we don't know the exact model that we'll take on. I think we, as a traditional media company, making this transition to a new, really almost all digital media company, when you think about the years out, when the paper isn't, we hope the paper lasts for a really long time, but we know
AOL still sells dial-up accounts.
All those people are dead, and they're just getting it still, I think. And we hope that's not true of our subscribers to print, but we do think that'll be around for a while, but we know it's going away. And so we need to make this transition to a digital media company, and that doesn't mean only that you build digital products as you have a digital mindset. And that means you experiment, you pivot when you have to, but you have a strategy and goals, and you stay true to your values. So with the cooking app, it could take many forms. We're going to see how that goes.
Is the main New York Times app, does that run on your own APIs?
Yes.
And is that considered a major revenue stream at this point for the
well, it's a growing revenue stream. So mobile is now about 50% of our traffic, and that's pretty consistent among most media properties. I think we're probably more on the desktop because a lot of people use us at work. But we know that is growing steadily, probably 5 to 10% a year. You never know when there's going to be that step function. I just got my iPhone 6 Plus, which I love, and that's sort of supplanted a lot of my other devices.
Is that an iPad or is that an iPhone? Will I be able to run the iPad app on that, or do I have to run the iPhone app on that?
No, there's still no universal binary for business reasons. But the larger screen sizes, again, has really forced us inside the company to rethink a lot of our pricing models and business models. So more to come on that in the next few months, I think. But you'll probably see some different types of pricing that we'll be rolling out or experimenting with.
That's cool. That's very cool. the news business is an unusual one for what we have seen in this area because it's one of the few businesses where production and distribution are in the same place. And that, the New York Times is where I get my news, but the New York Times also writes the news. And so I see in your conversation about the links, most of the other businesses that we work with, I've got a data thing, but someone else uses it. I've got, I'm Best Buy. I have, I don't make the TVs, I sell them. And because you're both the production and the distribution, both sides of the house, the content people think that it's all because of them.
Right.
Right. The distribution people think it's all because of them. And then you see the arguments between the production and distribution people outside, the Hachette versus Amazon.
Yeah.
In the New York Times or in a typical news organization, you were a journalist before, so you've played on both teams. Who is more important? And if there's APIs between the two of them, who's benefiting the most?
It's an interesting question because I think it's like choosing between your kids and saying who's your favorite.
You're my favorite daughter, you're my favorite son.
We in technology know that without the journalists in the newsroom, we don't have a business. There's an increasing realization that on the part of the newsroom that without technology, they don't have a business.
Well, but the Forbes folks pretty much shot the newsroom and kept the distribution. So arguably, technology, you could have a business. You just would have a newsroom that wasn't those people.
True. On the other hand, the New York Times has a certain, I think, sui generis kind of thing about it where there's nothing else like it.
Yeah.
And so if nothing against Forbes, but it's different. So I think the kinds of things that the Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, a few other traditional media players are doing really matter. Which is not to say the freelancers covering Afghanistan or Iraq or ISIS in Syria or Ebola aren't brave, but you need an infrastructure of a global news organization to do these things right.
Yeah.
And I think so I think newsrooms still matter. Yeah. I'm a very big believer in community journalism. I believe in the power of networks and in the power of our audience to fully participate. That said, I think it is that much more powerful when you have a group of trained journalists, just as you have a group of trained engineers. I mean, I used to have folks working for me who said, you don't really need trained journalists. You can just, anybody can do that job. And I said, would you let someone in your infrastructure who didn't know how to code? No, never.
That's totally different, totally different.
So, it's totally different. So I think those two go together, and I think there's a growing realization that we are all connected, and that the internet has connected all of us in ways that no traditional journalists would have foreseen, or traditional technologists for that matter.
Do you, we've sort of seen the API world here evolving from syndication to mobile and now to a lot of connected devices. Yeah. Are you looking at devices other than the traditional ones that we either carry with us or have? What sorts of things would you see as potential?
We're looking at all kinds of wearables.
With what? From a notification standpoint?
Notifications are huge on mobile. They will be on smartphones. We still think the smartphone will be the dominant device for some time to come. Which is not to say smartwatches and Google Glass and other types of things we can't imagine yet will have a role to play. We think IoT is going to be a bigger and bigger part of our lives, and so having really great data formatted in a way that is platform agnostic, yet gives our editors the kind of full control to make it really great on each device is kind of what we're after.
Do you see moving beyond journalism to sort of, we've got all these sensors out there and real time. So if Google is taking all the world's knowledge and making it searchable, if you're giving me all the news that's fit to print, see, whatever, crunch, Does that start to include things that come from places other than journalists typing at keyboards?
I think so. I mean, it already does, right? In the sense that we collect polling data, we collect, we collect weather data, we collect sports data, we collect a lot of different types of data. Ultimately, I think we have two competitive advantages. One is certainly trust. If we send you a news alert, you believe just because you got a news alert from somebody else, maybe a little quicker, you can believe our news alert that it's actually been checked by a human. We've got the healthcare interpretation of the Supreme Court right. We've got the, which some other news organizations got
Might
wrong.
not get, yes.
The other thing I think is interpretation, right? So I'll give you an example. So we launched a new kind of site within a site called The Upshot, which does kind of quantitative, David Leonhardt's site. It does quantitative journalism. It's kind of like Nate Silver's 538 and Ezra Klein's Vox. To me, quantitative journalism is journalism, but guys who know how to do math. But they're doing a lot of work on the election and really trying to predict will the Republicans capture the Senate. Yeah. And so they're downloading a lot of data from different types of pollings. So one of the developers said, well, we put all this data up on GitHub, and so anybody can go download it and see how our algorithms and see how we've calculated and see that the data is accurate. So it's kind of taking APIs even a step further. So it's
are you getting any feedback from people saying, here's a new interpretation of that might cause you to?
We just did it, so it's a little early. But it's out there, right? And you can look at all the other predictions from all the other sites on our site. So it's really interesting how we're all kind of looking at each other's data and playing with it and making sense of it.
So what, 2006 to now, so you've been there, 8 years, 6 sort of running the tech show.
Yeah.
And in those 6 years, you've obviously, an awful lot has happened and you've done a lot. Every time I talk to you, grab beers, you seem still really excited about what you're doing. What excites you about the next 5 years? What is it that when you were sitting here back in 2008 leaking out the API news, what's the next thing that is exciting you about this?
I think that the really exciting thing for me is, especially as someone whose roots are in journalism, is how technology and journalism and information are all kind of coalescing. And the storytelling that our journalists are able to do is becoming more device specific, because right now we have this great shift underway to mobile because we know everything is going that way. So it's almost like this rebirth of the internet all over again, right? Yeah. Where you're all of a sudden saying, okay, the things that we're just getting people used to the fact that the physical paper isn't the most important thing, it's the web, now it's mobile, pretty soon it's going to be Internet of Things and other devices. So it's really forcing our journalists in our newsroom to think about new ways of covering things, and for us in technology, thinking about new ways to visualize data, thinking about new ways to connect our journalists to our readers, and to have this community, which I think is just going to keep growing. So that's I think, the most exciting thing for me. And to watch the New York Times, which is a 160-plus-year-old institution, really make this transition to a new age.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah. Well, thanks for coming and spending some time with us. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Thanks.